Hey guys, welcome back to Heavy Metal Horizons. And this video is going to be a little bit different than the stuff I typically would do or have done before. Usually on this channel we talk about cars and aviation. And in this video we're going to talk about ham radio. And in particular I want to talk about why somebody would get into ham radio today when obviously we don't really need this stuff to communicate with each other. Also, I've known about ham radio and amateur radio for a very long time, but I'm new to actually being an amateur radio operator myself, being a ham myself. And so I've kind of put my rig together that I'm finally pretty happy with. And I want to give you guys a few pieces of advice for people who are just getting into it that might, save you some trouble and that kind of stuff when you're just starting out. So of course, real quick guys, if you like videos like this, not just about ham radio, but of course about aviation, airplanes, and cars, and you have not already subscribed, please consider subscribing right now. So first, let me tell you a little bit about kind of my history and why I got into ham radio recently. So back when I was a kid, my parents had built a special room in our house. It was above the garage, kind of in the back of the house, and this was called the project room. And it was a place that my dad and I could build models up there, and there was a big area on the floor where we could do puzzles, me and my sister and my mom and my dad. We could just kind of do projects, and it was just a place to work on stuff. And in that room my dad had an old shortwave radio set, receiver, and he had connected it to a big antenna that he strung out in the backyard. So this was like an HF radio, high frequency, and we would sit there at night and tune this thing and listen to it and see what stations we could pick up. And then on the wall, we had a huge world map, right? And a flat world map, and it was on like a kind of like a cork board backing or something. So you could stick pins in this map. And so every time we heard a new place, a new location, we'd put a pin in it. And so eventually, we had pins all over the map, Japan and places in like, I don't know, Korea and that kind of thing, and Europe, of course, all these different places that we were able to pick up on this little shortwave radio. And it was an old radio back then. It was some kind of Zenith radio. And this was like in the 90s when we were doing this. And my dad would explain to me like, oh, well, these other people around the world, they have these different radio setups. And depending on the frequency, you've got skywave propagation, right? And so you can actually hear signals that are beyond the horizon, the curvature of the Earth, around the curvature of the Earth, and this kind of thing. And it was kind of blew my mind as a kid, and it was just really cool to be able to listen to this, listen to these signals that were coming from all over the planet. Really fun. So fast forward, I don't know, 20-something years, right? And I had gotten into aviation. I was always into models and stuff as a kid, but I'd become a private pilot and really gotten into aviation. And of course, I've always been involved in like audio gear just as a musician and stuff. Oh, and by the way, hi to everybody who's coming over from the Guitar Max channel. But so this was stuff that I was kind of involved in the, sort of adjacent fields, you could say. But I had never really gotten into actually being a radio operator myself. So what happened was I was at a meeting of a group called Wings Over Wendy's, and this is a great group with a lot of usually older veterans and a lot of pilots and people like that, guys who were have been involved in aviation for a long time. And one of the guys there gave us a presentation on ham radio, a guy named Andy. And he brought in some equipment, and he talked about bugs and keys and CW and these different power levels, and you get a license, and it permits you to do these different things and that kind of stuff. And it just kind of relit my curiosity and my excitement for this stuff. And I was like, wow, 2020 or 2021, I forget when this presentation was, but it's like, wow, people are still doing this. Even when everybody has a cell phone, people are still into this stuff, and that sounds like a lot of fun. So at that point I started, kind of researching it again and getting back into it. And that was when I really decided like, okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get my license. So I got a technician license, which is the first level for an amateur radio operator. But even before I got my license, the first thing I did, and I think this worked out great, and I recommend it to everybody who's interested in this, was I bought a infamous Baofeng UV5R. This is a UV5RT, and I've got the extended battery pack on here. And this is actually a dual band ham radio, 2 meters, 70 centimeters. This one supposedly goes up to 8 watts. That's the 5RT tri-power. It's got 3 different power levels. I've never actually tested it. I think 8 watts is being pretty generous, to be honest. And legally, without a license, you are not supposed to transmit with one of these, but you can certainly listen to anything that's on there. And the best thing about these radios is they are so cheap. You can get one of these radios for like $35, $40 or something like that, and there's a bunch of little extra things you can get for it. The 2 things I have hooked up to it here, this is to hook it up to an external speaker, and or like headphones or something. And this thing is if you, instead of that little whip antenna that's on here, you can hook it up to a big antenna, and then obviously your reception will be much, much better. And yeah, so number one, as far as recommendations for people who are thinking of getting into this now, start out with a radio like this. Even if you don't have a license and you're not planning to do any transmitting with it, start out with a radio like this because it's so inexpensive. It's easy to get into. These are fairly easy to use, program, that kind of stuff. You can scan with them, frequency scanning. It's slow, but it works. So suggestion number one is get one of these radios. And if you enjoy it, if you're having a good time, if you want to take it further, then you study up, get your license, and then you can get into the bigger radios. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, because one thing that is can be a little bit off-putting, I think, for people who are getting into amateur radio stuff, is the radios can be very expensive. You can easily spend thousands of dollars for like a nice, Kenwood or ICOM or something like that. And, if you're not sure if you really want to get into it, but at the same time, the really fun stuff kind of takes a nicer radio to get into, it can be, there's a lot of hesitation there, right? So what I've got here, I think, is a really good kind of basic setup that's relatively affordable, but you can still do a lot with it. So let me go through the equipment that I've got here. So the main unit is these 2 things right up here. So this is just your power supply right here. This is an R&L Electronics switching power supply, pretty basic, RLPS 30M. It's a 30 amp, 13.8 volt DC power supply. This or something like it is very traditional. This is traditionally what you would use for a ham radio setup. Now the radio itself, this is a TYT TH7800 dual band transceiver. And it's, dual band, again, like this. It's in the 2 meter, 70 centimeter wavelengths, which is like 144 megahertz. That's like the 2 meter, and then 440 megahertz is the 70 centimeter. This radio, of course, hooks up to this power supply. You've got your mic, right, with all your buttons and everything for punching in your frequencies. And then you can't see it here, but on the back, the antenna plugs into it. And as far as power, this radio is 50 watts VHF, which is the 2 meter band, and 40 watts UHF, which is the 70 centimeter band. Now, down here is actually another radio that I got before this one, and quite honestly, this was a mistake. This setup here I absolutely recommend, the TH7800 and the power supply. This radio here, which is the QYT KT8900R, really, I really didn't care for it, and I got this to replace that radio. So I recommend this, don't really recommend this. Of course, this is a little bit less expensive. But it's got a few major issues with it. One big one is that you can't scan with it. You can't scan through frequencies to see, who's talking and that kind of stuff. If you know the frequency you want to listen to, you can program that into the radio, and then you can scan through those frequencies. But the purpose of scanning is because you don't know the frequency that someone is using. Like, you just want to like see what's going on out there. And this radio can't do that. It's a huge oversight. Anyway, enough of that. But let's talk about prices and that kind of stuff, like if you want to get into this stuff. The Baofeng, like I mentioned, it's like $35 or something. These two I got as a package deal, and I'll put links to all this stuff if you want to check it out down in the video description below. This radio is, I think, around a little under 200. I think I paid like 240 or something like that for the, for the pair of them together. So this is I want to say about a $200 radio, but it does everything I want it to, works great. I haven't had any technical issues with it. I'm getting really good audio reports, so people that I'm talking to on the radio are saying I sound very good. I'm coming through clear and strong and that kind of thing. It's terrific. So I think if you're looking for, if you maybe started out with something like this and you're like, hey, I want to get a little more serious, I want to get a better radio, but I don't want to spend $1,000, right? I highly recommend this radio right here. Now, the other big thing I have down here, there's two more things I want to show you. This thing down here is just a scanner, right? Receive only. You can't transmit with this. But what's cool about this is this covers a really wide range of frequencies and different bands. And so you can pick up, HF, high frequency stuff. So like the signals I used to be listening to as a kid, I can pick up with this. You can also, I can listen to, actually, let me turn this up. I've got it on here. I can listen to all the airplane traffic around here. I've got it tuned to the Van Nuys tower frequency right now, 119.3 megahertz. See if anybody's on there.
That's the 46028 now. 7028. Reserve 28, change runway 16 left, contact tower 120.2, traffic citation 2 miles from trailer. We got that traffic, 120.2.
Okay, so he's that's the tower controller. He's telling him to switch over to the other tower frequency, 120.2, which is the frequency they use when they get busy on 16 left, which is the shorter of the two runways. So, I can sit here at home and listen to the Van Nuys traffic and stuff. Now, you can listen to a lot of that stuff over the internet with live ATC or something like that, but really only the approach frequencies and the tower and ground frequencies of the bigger airports you can get online. What you can't really do is listen to guys just flying around up in the air talking to each other, like the air-to-air frequencies. You can't really get that stuff because you're listening to it through, some repeaters picking it up and putting it on the internet, and then you're connecting through the internet and listening to it. But with this radio, I'm getting the actual signal direct from whoever's transmitting it. So the scanner down here, and this is a Uniden Bearcat BC890 XLT scanner. I got this used on eBay, I don't know, $80 or something like that. Maybe not even that much, maybe $60. And it's great. So you can just sit here and scan through all the frequencies and listen to all kinds of stuff with this. So if you're going to just listen, if you don't have a license, you don't want to transmit, you just want to listen to people, this is a great choice. So really, this is my main transmitting, transceiver unit up here, and this is just for listening down here. Now there's one more thing I want to show you, which has to do with the antenna that I'm using, and this is important. Now it's a little bit hard to see, so I'll put a close-up of this in here, but inside here, I've got an antenna switcher box, but I'm actually using it in reverse. And so normally you would use it where you have one radio and then you have different antennas that you want to use depending on which band you're going to use. And so you would switch between the different antennas. But in my case, I only have one antenna and I'm switching the radios between that one antenna. So I just have it kind of wired in backwards. But basically it's got 3 positions. I'm only using 2 of them right now. All the way down is the scanner, and then up is my transceiver right here. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the antenna, because antennas are very important. So I have a big disadvantage in that I live in an apartment in the Los Angeles area. And so I can't just put a huge antenna up in my backyard or something like that, because I don't have a yard, right? So what I ended up doing is I have an antenna that is meant to be used on a car, and it can be mounted to glass. And so I have mounted this on one of the outside one of the outside windows and then there's the coupler, which is on the inside of the window. And then I've got a line running from that into the antenna switcher. And honestly, it's not ideal. I mean, I would love to set up some massive antenna, something like that, but it actually works, I mean, surprisingly well. I'm able to call, the repeaters and that kind of stuff and talk to people without any issues. And all this stuff, I mean, 50 watts is not a lot of power in radio terms. That's really pretty conservative. So even with 50 watts or even less, I use that same antenna. I can hook up the Baofeng to that. And even with this, supposedly 8 watts, I was able to make some pretty good connections and that kind of stuff using that antenna. So the antenna has worked out really well. But actually, if there's anybody out there watching, if there are any hams out there watching, you understand the situation I'm in, do you have any recommendations for apartment antennas or something like that that you think might be better than what I'm using right now? I would love to hear what you think. Let me know down in the comment section below. Okay, so again, equipment-wise, if you want to start getting into this, you think you might enjoy it, I do personally recommend you get one of these cheap Baofeng UV5R radios. Again, this is the UV5RT. A lot of people badmouth these radios. I mean, they are very cheap. They're like, oh, those cheap Chinese radios, they don't last very long. It doesn't have to last very long, just long enough for you to figure out if you enjoy the hobby or not. And then you can step up to something, you spend a little bit more money, you get a little bit more firepower and that kind of stuff. So one last equipment thing, and then I want to talk about why somebody would be doing ham radio today. But yeah, last equipment thing is this sort of box or rack right here. I got this off of, from an eBay seller. These are like $35, $39, $35, $40. And they're just the right size. And of course you can drill into this stuff. I think these were originally supposed to be like little benches to sit on or something like that. But you put it together sort of like IKEA furniture and it just works out great. Now, if you look on the bottom here, I've got a big piece of wood. I wanted to put a bottom on this so I can now just pick up the whole thing and move it around, if it's in the way or I want to set it up on the dining table or something like that, and then not get in trouble with my wife. I can move it later. So I wanted to be able to have a bottom on it so I could pick up the whole thing and have things on the bottom and just move it all in one shot. So I just went to Home Depot, the hardware store, and I got a piece of poplar and I cut it, I painted it, drilled it, screwed it together, and it's worked out great. So I'm just really happy with this whole setup. And I'll put links for all this equipment, all this stuff I'm talking about down in the video description below. But now, the real question is, why would somebody want to do this today? Because obviously, if you want to talk to your buddies, call them on the phone, text them, send them an email, DM them, whatever, right? You do not need to call them up and, broadsword to Denny Boy, come in, Denny Boy, right? We don't have to do that anymore. But I will tell you this is just so much fun. That's the reason to do it. It's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of educational sort of aspects to it. If you wanted to do it maybe with, if you have kids or something like that, I mean, there's a lot of really, like wavelength. What is wavelength? That question right there, opens up, all this stuff about science and engineering and stuff, which, once you learn those things, the world becomes a much more fascinating place, I would argue. And questions like, well, why do some signals travel further than others, even if they're being transmitted at the same power level? Why is that? Right? All of these sort of basic questions that come up when you're doing ham radio, the answers to those questions will open up so many doors into how the world works and how the universe works, right? So there's some really cool educational aspects to it. But at the end of the day, it's fun. And there's also a little bit of a sense of adventure, right? When you're scanning through the frequencies and you're listening for somebody talking and it's like, who's this person? What are they talking about? Where are they? There's all these unanswered questions. And then you can key up and introduce yourself and talk to them and get those questions answered. And there's a little bit of excitement, like I said, a little bit of adventure to it. And you can do all of it from the comfort of your own home. Maybe there's somebody out there that wants to do something cool and a little bit adventurous, and maybe you can't walk, right? Or you've got some other health problem which prevents you from getting out in the world and doing things. You can still get into this hobby and you can do the same things that everyone else in the hobby can do. So, you know, if there's some kind of physical reason where you can't do those other things, this, I think, is a great hobby for somebody in a situation like that, because, you know, all you physically have to do is twist some knobs and press some buttons and talk on the mic. And it's a lot of fun. So anyway, guys, if you're normally tuning in for car videos or something like that, you know, sorry for the departure, but I hope you enjoyed this stuff. Like I said, I really, you know, I'm just really happy with this setup. I've been really having a lot of fun with it, and so I just wanted to make a video about it. But again, I'll put links for all this stuff and equipment, and if you want to read more about ham radio and getting a ham radio, radio operator's license, that kind of thing, I'll put all that information down in the video description below. All right, guys, thanks a ton for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll talk to you soon.